This lesson is about Pythagorean theorem. So the goal is to find the length of a hypotenuse or any side in a right triangle using Pythagorean theorem. So Pythagorean theorem is the formula a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And we use Pythagorean theorem in right triangles only. The important part about Pythagorean theorem is that the c part in the formula is the hypotenuse in the right triangle. So a right triangle is a triangle that has a 90-degree angle. So a 90-degree angle is shown by a little box in the corner of the triangle. So now with the hypotenuse, there's two ways that you can tell or identify the hypotenuse. The first one is that it's the longest side of the right triangle. So the hypotenuse is always the longest side. Sometimes the hypotenuse is drawn in a way that you can't really tell if the hypotenuse or which one of the three sides is the longest side. So then you can go to the second way of figuring this out, which is the hypotenuse is the opposite of the right angle, the opposite side to the right angle. So we go to the right angle and directly across from that is always the hypotenuse. So the 90-degree angle points to the hypotenuse. So the other two sides are called the legs of a triangle. So the legs of the triangle are the two sides that actually form the 90-degree angle. So our first leg joins with our second leg and they create the 90-degree angle. So in our Pythagorean theorem, a squared is just one of the legs that's squared. B squared is the second leg that is squared. And then c squared is the hypotenuse. So Pythagorean theorem doesn't have to use a, b, and c. It can use any other variables to represent the different sides. So in this example here, the two legs would be g and m, and the hypotenuse would be k. Typically, though, we see Pythagorean theorem as a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So the first example is to find the hypotenuse, and we want to give our answers to one decimal place. So one number after the decimal. So the first thing that we want to do is identify the hypotenuse so we know what's going to go into the c position. So our hypotenuse, remember, is directly across from that 90-degree angle. That's going to be the c part. The two sides, it doesn't matter which one you call a and which one you call b. I could call 10a or I could choose to call 10b. So I'll just say a represents 10 and b represents 14. So now in our Pythagorean theorem, we're going to identify each of our variables. So our a is 10, so we'll have 10 squared plus our b, which is 14, and we'll square that, and this equals c squared. So now we have to square each of the numbers. So remember, to square something means to multiply it by itself. So 10 squared is 10 times 10, which is 100. 14 squared is 14 times 14, which is 196. And this equals our c squared. So now we want to add these two values together to get to 296. And now the last part that we want to do is square root both sides of our equation, because we don't want the c squared value, we just want the c value. So we're going to square root both sides of the equation, and our c will equal 17.2. So in our next example, again, we're trying to find the hypotenuse. So we're going to identify that directly across from our 90-degree angle. So that's going to go in the C position of our Pythagorean theorem formula. And then the two sides, again, are A and B. So we'll take our A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So substitute in the values that you know. So our A is 12.3, so 12.3 squared, plus our B is 15.2 squared equals C squared. So now we're going to square each of our values. So 12.3 times 12.3 is 151.29. Then we've got 15.2 squared, so 15.2 times 15.2 is 231.04, and this equals our C squared. So now we want to add our two values together. We'll get 382.33 equals our C squared. And then we want to square root both sides. When we do that, our C equals 19.55, but we just want one decimal place. So the 5 will round the first 5 up to a 6. So our C equals 19.6 meters. So our next example is a little bit different because this time we're looking for a missing leg. We know what the hypotenuse is. Our hypotenuse is directly across from our 90-degree angle. So in this example, our hypotenuse is 14. And in this example, we're looking for one of the legs. So I'm going to call 10 our A, and the X is going to be the B. So now let's substitute in what we know. So we're going to have A squared will be 10 squared. In the B position is X. So we'll have X squared equals our C, which is 14. So 14 squared. So again, square what you know. So here we're going to have 10 times 10 is 100 plus our X squared equals 14 squared is 14 times 14, which is 196. So now in this one, we can't just add our two values together because they're on different sides of the equal sign. So when that happens, we need to subtract the 100 from both sides. So we're going to subtract 100 from our first side that has the X in it. We're going to subtract 100 from the second side. So 100 minus 100 is 0. So that part cancels out and we're just left with an X squared equals 196 minus 100, which is 96. So now we'll take the square root of both sides and we'll get X equals 9.79. Again, to one decimal place, that 9 is going to bump the 7 up to an 8. So we'll get 9.8. So our last example, again, we already have the hypotenuse and we're looking for one of the sides. So again, identify that hypotenuse so you know that it goes in the right position. So directly across from that 90-degree angle, that's our C value. And then our other two legs are going to be A and B. So we'll have A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So substitute in what you know. So our A is X, so we'll have X squared. Our B is 8.2. So square that. And then our hypotenuse, our C part, is 12.3 squared. So again, it's very important that the hypotenuse goes all by itself on the second side of the equation. So now square what you can. So our x squared will stay as x squared. 8.2 times 8.2 is 67.24. We're going to square the 12.3. So 12.3 times 12.3 gives us 151.29. Now again, our two values are on different sides of the equal sign. So we have to get rid of this 76.24 because we want our x part by itself. So again, we're going to subtract 67.24. So our 67.24 will add to 0, so we don't need that. So we'll end up with x squared equals 84.05. We're going to square root both sides. So our x equals 9.16. Again, the 6 will round that 1 up to a 2. So x equals 9.2 meters. So that is Pythagorean theorem, finding the different sides, finding the hypotenuse, and also finding one of the legs.